You're pulling daily audit logs, tracking Teams messages, exporting activity from Power BI, and yet your execs still ask, so what? If you're tired of guessing how M365 usage impacts your KPIs, this is for you. We're about to map real business value, not just usage stats. If you want to see how your workflows tie directly to outcomes, keep watching. Why M365 usage stats don't tell the whole story. If you've ever built a dashboard stuffed full of SharePoint file uploads and Teams chat volumes, but then had that awkward moment in a meeting when someone asks, but what did that actually do for the business? Yeah, you're not the only one. Most organizations love these activity dashboards because they're easy to spin up and give the appearance that things are humming along. SharePoint file counts, email sends, OneDrive syncs, Teams calls. You can slice and dice those numbers as much as you want. They're fast, they're flashy, and they make for very colorful charts. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Just knowing people are uploading files or spending time in Teams doesn't tell you if your projects are finishing faster, if sales are trending up, or if customers are any happier. You can monitor every click, every upload, and every heartbeat of SharePoint activity, but it's all just noise if nobody can draw a line between the graph and an actual business outcome. That's the core frustration for a lot of IT and business folks. Tons of movement, no indication of impact. Let's play out a scenario most IT teams will recognize. Picture a manager at a quarterly business review. They've come armed with colorful reports showing a massive increase in Teams chat messages over the past 3 months. They've got bar charts comparing SharePoint document activity across departments. There's a pie chart for OneDrive usage because why not? They proudly display the dashboard, expecting at least a little applause. Instead, they get a room full of blank faces, maybe a polite nod from finance, and then someone at the table says, so, what does this mean for our clients or for the project deadlines? Suddenly, the conversation is less about the pretty visuals and more about what's missing from the picture. This isn't an outlier moment either. The big disconnect is that M365 activity data by itself is frictionless to capture. Microsoft's admin centers and usage reports will happily track every digital breadcrumb, but proving that breadcrumb trail actually led somewhere valuable, that's where people get stuck. You can tell your leadership team, hey, Teams chat volume went up 30% during Q2, but without context, they have no clue if that's a win for collaboration or just a sign of a project in chaos. I've seen project teams bask in high chat numbers, only to realize it was because people were scrambling to clarify requirements that weren't clearly documented in the first place. In that case, more activity might just mean more confusion, not faster results. And here's where it gets interesting. Studies from industry analysts, including Forrester and Gartner, have shown that many organizations equate an uptick in M365 usage with digital transformation or business outcomes. But once researchers look closer, the data often falls apart. For example, one Forrester study tracking digital workplace initiatives found that reported usage numbers accounted for less than 20% of the measurable improvement in business KPIs like project throughput or customer satisfaction. The real correlation only showed up when companies went one step further and embedded key business metrics or KPIs alongside their usage stats. That means if you're just showing activity, logins, file shares, message counts, you're probably selling your digital efforts short and maybe even fooling yourself. Here's a real example from a client I worked with last year. They rolled out a new Teams-based workflow for their onboarding projects. Early on, they celebrated a huge increase in team posts each week, so much so that they considered the rollout a success and stopped digging. But a few months later, HR flagged that project completion times hadn't budged at all. All that banter on Teams, a lot of it was people spinning their wheels, not actually moving projects to done. If they tracked completed onboarding tasks or project cycle times next to their team stats, they would have noticed sooner that chat activity on its own didn't guarantee real progress. What's even more common is treating the presence of M365 activity as proof that users have adopted a new tool or workflow. But as anyone who's ever pushed a new SharePoint site knows, clicking a link or opening a document isn't the same as mastering a process or making an impact for the business. In some cases, you get plenty of usage activity because users are lost. Other times, silence means work is getting done efficiently. Vanity metrics dress up the dashboard, but they can hide underlying problems. So if your dashboards mainly showcase SharePoint and Exchange usage, you're measuring motion, not meaning. The answer to that skeptical so what from your leadership team starts with ditching the assumption that more clicks and messages equal more results. You need to pull in data that actually matters, things like sales closed, cases resolved, or projects launched on time. That's how you move beyond surface level reporting. There's a much better way. And it starts by putting your M365 metrics side by side with the raw business numbers your execs really care about. Now imagine if you could wire up your M365 data directly to those business KPIs. What could you uncover if you stopped guessing and linked usage to what moves the dial for your organization? Let's see how that actually works. Connecting M365 data to custom KPIs, the missing link. If you've ever wondered whether that extra bump in SharePoint site hits actually helped your sales team close more deals, or if it just added more noise to your digital workspace, you're not alone. A lot of us sit with slick usage dashboards hoping these metrics mean something concrete. Unfortunately, M365 activity data and real business outcomes often live in totally separate worlds. It's the classic silo problem. IT pulls user activity, compliance tracks audit events, and the business side runs their own spreadsheets on project completions or net promoter score. When those two sides never meet, it doesn't matter how much data you're collecting, you'll only ever see half the picture. This is one frustration I hear from IT teams and digital leaders over and over. But there's no shortage of data. Microsoft pumps out logs for every SharePoint upload and Teams message, while CRMs, project tools, and feedback forms generate their own numbers. The headache starts when you realize you can't answer basic questions like, did more Teams collaboration speed up our product launch? Or did all those added SharePoint files coincide with closing projects or boosting satisfaction scores? You're sitting on a gold mine and mostly finding gravel. Let's look at where things break down. A pretty common mistake is thinking the finish line is getting M365 audit logs and usage data into Power BI. You set up automated refreshes from the Microsoft Graph, plug in your standard usage reports, maybe layer on some activity by department or location. It looks comprehensive, except you're stuck at counting actions, not measuring impact. That's because the second half of the puzzle, bringing in actual business KPIs, gets skipped or someone thinks we'll do it later. In the end, you have beautiful dashboards about logins and uploads, but you still can't answer whether any of it moved customer satisfaction, improved delivery timelines, or increased revenue. Picture this. A project manager comes to IT with a problem. Her team has ramped up in Teams chat and collaboration during a critical phase. She wants to know, did all that conversation actually help the project finish faster? Or was everyone just frantically messaging because the process was unclear? The only way to know for sure is to bring in both sets of numbers. Teams activity from audit logs and project timeline data from whatever source is tracking delivery, maybe a project management tool, maybe just a simple Excel sheet with start and finish dates. So where do you begin? The ground level step is grabbing the right data from both sides. On Power BI side, you've got options. There are out-of-the-box M365 connectors that tap directly into SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, and Outlook activity reports. Pulling in those audit logs is usually straightforward, if a little fiddly. Most of the time, you're exporting user, site, or file activity with a date stamp. Now, on the KPI side, you want those high-value numbers, the sales pipeline, project completions, NPS scores, whatever aligns with your business goals. These typically live in a CRM, a project system sometimes buried in Excel, or even available by API. Power BI brings these sources together easily. You just import your KPI tables, connecting via SQL database, a SharePoint list, Excel export, or directly from services like Salesforce or Dynamics. The tricky bit is what comes next. And this is where a lot of dashboards go off the rails. The real challenge isn't pulling in two big hunks of data. It's making sure those hunks can talk to each other in a way that actually makes sense for your business. Most teams stop the moment both tables appear in Power BI. They'll have SharePoint activity by user and date and a completely separate KPI table, and that's it. At that point, all you can do is stare at two parallel trend lines and squint, hoping for some correlation. That's not analysis, that's guesswork with extra steps. To do it right, you have to set up relationships that let you answer questions like, did an increase in Teams meetings over the project timeline result in faster completion? Or is high SharePoint upload activity during a sales campaign associated with more deals closing? You might have to match people based on user IDs, link activity, and project events by date windows, or use other fields that tie a digital action to a real-world outcome. Sometimes this means you'll need to tidy your data or add calculated columns so the links make sense in Power BI. And you'll want to spend time understanding whether the relationship is direct, lagged, or requires a custom calculation, because often that flurry of activity you saw last week only shows results a month later when the project closes out. Here's where it gets interesting. Once you pull in those KPIs alongside your activity data and create intelligent relationships between them, you finally stop wandering in the dark. You begin to see with clarity whether all that Teams buzz is driving real project wins, or if SharePoint usage is shadowing your best sales months. You're not left spinning stories based on fluffy activity charts. Now, you're tracing a line from actions in Microsoft 365 to real bankable business results. But don't stop here. Hooking up your data is just step one. What you build next in your data model determines the quality of every insight you get from then on. That's where the real story begins to take shape. Building a unified data model, turning noise into narrative. Anyone can drag half a dozen CSVs or connectors into Power BI and call it a dashboard, but actually lining up a SharePoint file upload with the outcome of a real project. That's where things shift from simply moving data to showing business value. Once you've pulled your activity logs and KPIs into the same project, what stands in your way isn't the data, it's the web of relationships or the lack of them. Most dashboards end up as a jumble of tables with fields scattered all over and no single flow tying one business event to another. If you've glanced at your Power BI model and seen it bristle with random connections, tables connected by dotted lines, some floating alone in the corner, it's a sign you probably don't have a story, just a lot of technical trivia. It's easy to feel you've built something robust, but sooner or later someone will ask for a question you can't answer without hunting for data that's not there, or realizing your relationships are just skin deep. There's a trick to this that most folks overlook. Think about your data model as the nervous system of your reporting. You need real wiring between tables, otherwise signals never make it to the brain of your business. Those executive dashboards that are supposed to drive decisions. Use the right keys and your dashboard lights up with insights you haven't seen before. Use the wrong ones or nothing at all and your reports go numb. It's painfully common to see SharePoint logs linked by a generic username field while project completion data sits on its own island. Without those neural pathways, data just floats, no context, no cause and effect, just noise. So what should you be wiring together? On the M365 side, you've got fields like site ID, user ID, and activity date. These are your building blocks for activity trails: who did what, where, and when. Business KPIs, your sales pipeline, project delivery stats, or customer satisfaction will usually have their own structure with fields like project ID, completion date, or customer score. To stitch everything together in Power BI, you need to map the keys that actually intersect these worlds. Site ID lines up nicely with project teams and shared document spaces. Activity date and completion date can be matched up to see what actions led up to or followed a major milestone. User ID lets you connect the digital behavior of specific people to the teams or outcomes you care about. Of course, the devil is always in the details. If you've ever imported a project table only to realize none of your SharePoint logs have matching IDs, that experience will feel familiar. Overlapping IDs, like two systems generating 123 for entirely different things, will quickly ruin your day. Mismatched time zones, for example, are a classic trap. Say your SharePoint activity logs are stamped in UTC, but your project tracking tool uses local time. You'd be surprised how easily that 6-hour gap will skew your trend lines and mislead your execs. Missing or inconsistent fields are another culprit. Sometimes user IDs come in as email addresses in one source and as actual IDs in another, leaving you to patch things up with calculated columns or manual lookups. Let's walk through a scenario that brings these pain points to life. Imagine your business wants to know if speeding up SharePoint document approvals during a product launch really helps projects close faster. First, you get the SharePoint activity logs, capturing every approval with timestamps, who approved what and on which site. Next, you bring in your project timeline data, maybe from a project management system, with each project's kickoff, milestones, and completion date. The next move is connecting those dots, mapping approvals by activity date, perhaps narrowed to a specific window around the project's final phase, onto the milestones in your KPI table. If your model is set up to link documents or users to their corresponding projects, you can now visualize whether faster approvals map to shorter project cycles. With Power BI, you aren't limited to looking at raw tables side by side either. You get hands-on tools for making these relationships meaningful. Native relationships in Power BI allow you to define how tables connect based on site ID, user ID, or any other common field, and restrict the direction of those links to avoid circular logic. Calculated columns let you transform your data inside Power BI without dragging in a whole new ETL setup. This becomes essential when you need to normalize email addresses or break apart concatenated fields into something you can actually join on. Then there's DAX. With just a bit of know-how, you can create rolling counts, lead lag calculations, or even time intelligence measures to reveal patterns that would otherwise stay hidden. For example, you might set up a DAX measure to check if approvals in SharePoint spiked in the week before a project completed, letting you see at a glance if high activity is a cause or effect of delivery dates shifting. The end result of all this, a tidy, well-structured data model, isn't just a technical trophy. It's a narrative tool. Suddenly, the dashboard on your screen isn't just echoing how busy people are on Teams or SharePoint. It's translating every click, approval, or upload into signals that line up with business KPIs, telling leaders not just what happened, but what actually mattered. You can now see if those extra SharePoint approvals in crunch time genuinely correlated with faster project delivery, or if the numbers are just bouncing in their own lanes with no connection. You've got a dashboard that answers real questions, not just log statistics. Now, what if you could do even more? Predict how adjusting your M365 rollout might boost business KPIs next quarter, or model what-if scenarios to back your next IT investment. That's where Power BI's advanced tools start to shine. From reporting to ROI, advanced Power BI tools for real impact. If you've ever sat across the table from a finance director and tried to justify your next Teams or SharePoint upgrade, imagine how different that conversation would feel if you could clearly say, a 10% bump in Teams meetings helped us close projects 25% faster. That's the kind of ammo executives understand: real return on investment instead of technical activity logs. By the time you have a unified data model tying your M365 usage to business KPIs, you're finally in a position to go beyond reporting what happened. Now you can look ahead and ask, what if? And why? The truth is, most dashboards are built to look backward. They hand you page after page of charts on last month's activity and hope someone can spot a trend. But if you want to spark real changes or make a business case for more investment, static reports only get you halfway there. You need tools that help you explore scenarios and test theories. Basically, you want to let your data answer the questions leadership will actually ask next. For that, Power BI gives you a toolkit that's more advanced than most realize. With parameters, what-if analysis, and a bit of DAX, you can turn the typical rearview mirror report into a true business forecasting engine. Let's talk about the tools you'll use. Power BI parameters work a lot like sliders on a mixing board. You can set up a what-if parameter, say, to model hypothetical, what happens if Teams chat engagement goes up by 15% next quarter. Your dashboard doesn't just show what did happen, it lets anyone explore what could happen by nudging these scenario sliders. What surprises a lot of admins the first time they try this: it's fast and visual and works right out of the box. You set a base value, a minimum, maximum, and a step, and Power BI creates the variable for you. Then you connect that parameter to a measure like project delivery time or customer NPS to watch how shifting digital engagement might play out on core business goals. Here's a scenario that hits home for most project-driven teams. Imagine you've noticed delivery speed for key projects tends to line up with periods of intense document upload and feedback in SharePoint. With what-if parameters, you can build an interactive slider for SharePoint engagement. As you increase or decrease the simulated engagement, your dashboard instantly recalculates projected project cycle times using measures built in DAX. The leadership team can see in real time the likely impact of rolling out new SharePoint training or boosting adoption campaigns, not as a guess, but as data-supported projection. It turns your usual quarterly review into a strategy workshop, not just a status update. This is where DAX gets interesting. Yes, it's the backbone for calculated columns and measures, but its real power for business impact comes in rolling calculations and predictive patterns. Want to find the relationship between Teams meeting activity and project completion rates? You can build a rolling correlation correlation using DAX time intelligence functions. That way, you're not just comparing one month to the next, you're seeing how changes in M365 usage ripple through to business KPIs over time. For example, you can measure if higher Teams meetings in month one actually drive better outcomes or faster completions in month two or three. Many people don't realize you can even plot these lagged effects visually, right, in Power BI, helping you spot cause and effect instead of just coincidence. But before you start making bold claims, here's the step a lot of folks skip: validation. Just because two metrics rise at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. The real test is to look back at multiple cycles using last year's projects, onboarding surges, or even seasonal trends to see if spikes in M365 activity consistently align with improved business results. You can set up your reports to filter by timeframes, region, or department, testing if the ROI story holds up. If your what-if scenarios match the patterns you find in historical data, your case only gets stronger. Communicating these insights to non-technical stakeholders is its own hurdle. It's tempting to throw out scatter plots and regression lines, but the best approach is a clear before and after story. Frame the dashboard with a lead-in. Here's how our efforts in Teams translated to completed projects. Use simple visuals, trend lines, and a few pointed labels that tie usage spikes to result jumps. If you can show a single metric, like customer case closure speed, ticking up after a targeted M365 campaign, you're telling a story that resonates. The real win, you move from reactive reporting to proactive justification. When someone in leadership asks, are we really getting value from all this M365 stuff? You don't have to hedge or guess. You can point to specific numbers. This increase in user engagement directly supported a measurable business outcome. That's how you build a partnership with leadership, not just another IT spend request. When you get comfortable with advanced Power BI features, you stop being an observer and become a business driver, one whose recommendations are backed by impact, not just effort. Now that the dashboard is finally speaking the organization's language, showing clear connections between what teams do in M365 and the results that matter, you're ready to push the business case even further. If you've tinkered with usage reports and ended up with more questions than answers, you're definitely not alone. The real difference comes when you stop measuring activity for its own sake and start tying every SharePoint move or Teams chat directly to sales numbers, project milestones, or customer feedback. That's where the story gets clear. If proving ROI in your org has always felt like a guessing game, this approach gives you a real answer. Subscribe if you want more practical walkthroughs, and let us know what business questions you're hoping to finally close the loop on.